hear me? Me?
Try it now.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. So let's get started. Okay. I was born in Lithuania. Lithuania is in Eastern Europe, as most of you would know. I want to tell you that my story is only one of many. The survivors, there were thousands of survivors, and all of them have a story, and all those stories are important to tell. And now I'm going to tell you my experiences during the Holocaust. I was born in 1941. The Germans were coming in to Lithuania a month before I was born, in June of 1941. At that time, Lithuania was controlled by Russia, and the Lithuanians absolutely hated the Russians. And they were welcoming the Germans. They thought their lives would be better, and not as controlled. Also, many of anti-Semitism infected everybody and everything. It was a terrible time. And tragically, many Lithuanians killed the Jews before the Germans came in. They killed about 10,000 Jews before the Nazis ever came in, and the Nazis, of course, continued the slaughter. When they came in, they set up a ghetto in an old part of the city, and they put a barbed wire around them. And there was a certain day that they decreed that all the Jews of the ghetto, at that point there were 30,000 of them, must live in the ghetto. That was the law. My mother was just ready to give me birth. And one of the laws was that the Jewish hospitals cannot attend birth. It was that principle. My mother went outside of the ghetto to the Jewish hospital, right outside. The doctors, the hospital was locked already, and the doctors were inside finishing their work. But my mother insisted that she be let in. She made a fuss, and she yelled, and finally, to stop her from yelling and to stop the Nazis from hearing it, they let her in. And because I was the last child to be born there, they attended to my birth. And I didn't cry out at the beginning. The doctors had to make some kind of procedure for me to breathe, and I did live. 3 days after I was born, we had to go into the ghetto because at that point the gates were closed. And as I said, no Jew could be found outside of the ghetto. My father got a room from a mother, him and me, and we lived under terrible conditions. The ghetto was very crowded. It was a small area for 30,000 individuals, very small. The Nazis took control of the food. Food was scarce, never enough. The Jews would sell their stuff in order to get money to buy food to feed themselves. And that all the conditions were very terrible. The inmates of the ghetto were treated like slaves. like prisoners, and the situation was terrible. Worst of all, I think, what happened in the ghetto is that any time of day or night, the Nazis could bang on your door and take you and your family away to be killed. And to live with that kind of pressure 24 hours a day was unthinkable. Okay, we lived that way. And after 2 years, there was a horrific day which came. The Nazis came in to take all the children away from their parents. And now they took all the children away and killed them. And now there was tremendous amount of grief and despair among the parents. My parents lucked out. They hid me in the bunker in which they hoped to be saved until the end of the war. The bunker that they dug. I had an uncle and a cousin in the same ghetto, and there with my father prepared a bunker under our living quarters to eventually try to save themselves. And that's where they hid me. The Nazis didn't find me, and so I survived. I survived that terrible, terrible day. Very few children were left. And now, because the mothers were free of child care, they were forced into hard labor, just like their fathers were. Now, my mother and father, of course, worried what would happen during the day when they were away from work, when they were away in their workplaces. So they had to drug me. They had to drug me every day. So until midday or something like that, until someone would come and take care of me. One of them, I guess. That's the way I lived for months. And my father didn't think that would last. I started to lose weight. I was malnourished. And I forgot to walk because I was in one position for months and months and months in the bunker. One day, my father sold used sewing machines. He was in a shop, and a woman came in. Some Lithuanians got passes to come in and buy stuff from the Jews. So she came in. She came in a few times. My father never talked to her, but he was watching. And so one time when she came in he approached her. And he told her, would she please get me out of the ghetto? Would she please save my life? She was absolutely shocked and said that she could never do a thing like that because that would jeopardize her life and the life of her husband and 2 little girls. Anybody who was found helping Jews was in big trouble. The life was taken. So she said, of course she said she could not do it. My father asked her never to speak of this conversation, because even if this conversation, if the Nazis overheard or heard of the conversation, they would come and everybody would be in big trouble. So she went home, she ran home to her husband to tell him, and she described my father as a tall, dark, and handsome Jew approached me. And okay, he listened to this, and when she finished, he said to her, you have to go back and save that child. Don't you see that that is a gift from Jesus for raising you. She was also an orphan. And he felt, and the father felt that that's what they needed to do. So she went back to the ghetto and found my father and gave him a note, and she disappeared. The note said that that night they would come to smuggle me out. My father did not know, of course, her motivation. He never found out, of course, but he couldn't take a chance. Some Lithuanians took those children and only to hand them over to the Nazis. This family was the bravest family I ever knew. They were magnificent human beings. They wanted to do this, and they took a tremendous chance with their own lives and those of their two daughters. So, so my father went back, and my mother and I prepared me. My mother and my father prepared me to go out. They put me in a small blanket. I was tiny. I was already 2 years and 10 months old. And my father did not come to the barbed wire. My mother was in despair. She was besides herself. She was so upset. Maybe she was hysterical, I'm not sure. But my father had to stay with her. And so my cousin and an uncle, not related, they were cousins themselves, took me in a small blanket, and the Catholic family, the Catholic couple, her name was Branya, and his name was Adomus. They waited for hours at the barbed wire. They realized that my uncle and my cousin were waiting until the guards went away for a while. And finally, late at night, they raised the barbed wire, and I was smuggled out. And my Lithuanian parents, as I called them, eventually, they put me in a basket on their bikes. And on the way home, right outside of the ghetto, a German official appeared, and he said, "What are you doing here?" So Branya, the mother, said, "Oh, we were just at my cousin's house and we were celebrating her birthday party. Her birthday. This child fell asleep and now we're rushing home to put her in her own bed." So the Nazis said, "Okay, don't take this road, because if you take this road, there'll be more officials to ask questions. You better take that road." And that's the way I was saved. And we came home, and I lived with them for approximately a year and a half, 2 years. They were very wonderful people, as I said. They accepted me as part of the family. And I grew to love them, and they grew to love me. And we appeared as a noble Catholic Lithuanian family. They went to such extraordinary measures. You see, their neighbors knew that they were a family of 2 daughters, and if they saw a third girl, they would become very suspicious. So they went to the trouble of moving and getting an apartment at the other end of town where nobody knew them, and accepted them as a family with 3 daughters. I went to preschool with the daughters later on, And we lived for 2 years. We got very used to each other. After 2 years, at the end of the war, almost to the end of the war, my aunt, who ran away from the Nazis, a step ahead of the Russians, the Nazis, she ran away with my grandmother. So my grandmother and my aunt survived. And they came to get me. I did not want to leave because of the Catholic family. It was my family, and I was very attached to them. Also, Christmas was my favorite holiday, and I wanted to celebrate it with them. So my aunt, this was December already, and Christmas was coming, and so my aunt decided to stay with me until after Christmas. I also had to get used, she also had to give me time to get used to the stranger who was my aunt. And she needed time to, she eventually told me that I was Jewish and I belonged to her family. And they told me that I cried. I said I wasn't Jewish, I wasn't bad, and I wasn't Jewish. The children learned that Jews were bad. They learned that in school, not in the house. But in school, all the little kids learned that Jews are this, that, and the other thing. But after 2 weeks, my aunt was ready to take me out. I was very upset and angry. Okay. We had nowhere to go because all the countries closed their doors to the survivors of the Holocaust. Wait a minute. No country would accept us. And there were really no place we can go. The houses in the cities just were in ruin. So we went to Germany, and I lived in this place, Persons Camp, which the American Army set up for the survivors of the war, because it was well known that the survivors had no place to go. And we lived in a displaced persons camp between a year or 2 years. Okay. Now, I do remember that by that time I was 4.5 or 5 years old, and I do remember the displaced persons camp. I also always had images of my family and the house we lived in, but I didn't know who they are, what part of my life I was there, or anything. My aunt and uncle never talked about my past, so I didn't know. I couldn't put anything together. But I do remember some images, many flashbacks. Eventually, after 2 years, we took a ship to Israel under false pretenses. We all had false visa under another name. I was named Eva Fisher. I remember that. And we came to Israel. My aunt only wanted to go to Israel. She felt that that was the only place the Jews would be safe. Looking 60 years back, it seems ironic that they felt that Israel was safe for the Jews. We came to Israel. We lived there for 6 years in Israel, and my aunt and uncle continued to live there all their lives. My uncle is gone, but my aunt is about 87 years old now, and she's in her last she's in the last stages of Alzheimer's disease. I saw her just a few weeks ago when I was in Israel. I also saw my cousin, who was in the ghetto with me, and he's 85 years old. I know the details of what I'm telling you through my uncle and through my cousin who did survive the war. From the camp. Oh, I didn't tell you okay. At the end of July 1944, I'm going back a little bit to tell you that the Russians came to liberate the ghetto. And a lot of people hid in the bunkers. They prepared bunkers where they would hide the length of during the war and hoped that, of course, they would remain alive. Well, when the Russians came in and they chased the Nazis out, during their going out, it was their habit to burn the ghetto. And in the fire, in the burning, there were quite a few bunkers that went. And my parents were in one of those bunkers, and they did not survive. My cousin and my uncle did survive. The Nazis saw them, caught them, and they sent them to Dachau. And from Dachau, they did survive the war, and they immigrated to Israel, like my aunt, my uncle, and my grandmother. We all went to Israel. I lived there 6 years, and after 6 years, I was 12 years old, and my aunt found that it was a hard time in Israel, and she felt it was better for me to come to America. I had cousins in America, and arrangements were made for me to fly to America, and my cousins became my parents. They adopted me, and that's how I survived. I think I'm going to finish my story.
Thank you so much.